Right then, another week, another retro emulator handheld. It certainly feels like that at the moment, doesn't it? I wasn't going to get this one, which is why this video is maybe a few weeks behind most of the other channels that I watch in terms of actually featuring this console. This is the RG35XXSP from Anbernic. Game Boy Advance SP, much easier to remember. RG35XXSP, not so much. But anyway, yeah, that is my latest purchase. And as I say, I wasn't really going to buy it at first. I was certainly hesitant because a lot of these things come along and they get put up for pre-order. And sometimes they'll be great, sometimes not. Sometimes it's just worth waiting on the reviews. But the reviews for this one were so overwhelmingly positive, and I'd already been so very tempted by it that I kind of relented in the end. Now, most of the time when these things come along, they are styled to kind of give the effect of the original Game Boy, whether it's in the form factor or whether it's the color scheme. That's normally what appeals to me. It's the reason why I end up with things like the lovely little Miu Mini Plus here. It is a dinky little rendition of the original Game Boy, and I love it. It is a fantastic machine, which again kind of begs the question, did I really need to buy this? Because I do buy these things, you know, people don't just send me them for review. I buy them for myself. I feature them on my channel, yes, but I buy them because I like them and I like playing on them. More recently, again in a similar form factor to what we've got here, I've been playing a lot on the Powkiddy RGB20SX, another catchily titled handheld. So yeah, it's not quite like calling it Game Boy, is it? But you know, it's this thing. It had middling reviews. Yeah, it's flawed, but I adore this thing. I think it is awesome. It's got a square screen. Since I fixed up the buttons on the back and did a few other mods to it, I really enjoy playing on it. I've been playing on it a lot, and this was the main reason why I didn't initially get the Anbernic, this one here. So I'm trying like a two-camera setup today because, well, we'll just see how it goes, really. And I just wanted to do my initial impressions of this new console. So it is a clamshell design, which I haven't had before in terms of any consoles that I had bought that were this kind of emulator kind of thing. So this is something new, and a lot of the time these things tend to get a lot of flack that the actual hinge mechanism isn't particularly good. This is great, and it's even got magnets in the top to not only secure it, but also to enable a sleep mode, so you can close the lid and it stops playing, a bit like on a DS. But the original Game Boy Advance SP, which this is clearly styled after, didn't do that. In fact, speaking of the Game Boy Advance SP, as I say, like a lot of the ones that are styled after the original Game Boy is normally what appeals to me. But I got one of the Game Boy Advance SP when it launched. I thought that the idea, and I've got it in this cool little carry case as well. I thought that the idea of having a clamshell Game Boy to kind of halve the form factor when it comes to actually transporting it, but then have a very similar form factor. Let's just pop these side by side to have a very similar form factor to the original Game Boy. I thought was really, really cool at the time. It's the same sort of control layout, the portrait orientation. I liked it. I thought it was good. And for the first time, we had a Game Boy that had a lit screen. Now, you know, it's all relative, and it was more lit than any consoles that we'd had before from Nintendo in terms of the handheld. But this was front lit. You can see there's the light down at the bottom there, and you can switch that light off and on, and probably under this light you can tell very little of a difference. But being able to have that lit was great, and the form factor was nice to play on. It was a little bit hand crampy for long gaming sessions sometimes. We just had an A and B button, obviously, and the D-pad, start and select, all the rest of it felt really nice, quite shallow to the buttons and so on. Now this is similar, but not the same. It's borrowed a lot of cues from the Game Boy Advance SP. It doesn't have the Nintendo logo here, and it kind of looks a bit weird for it, I think. But it's taking some getting used to. But it does kind of give it a much more clean aesthetic, so not necessarily a bad thing. In terms of it being closed, at the back where we originally had the link port and the power cable, or you could have the headphone adapter in there, we've now got the USB and the HDMI output, so you can actually run this through your TV or through a monitor, which is kind of cool. And that is for charging it. You can use USB-C to charge it, but if you use like a high-speed, high-power USB charger, apparently that can cause some issues with the battery, which is sat right on top of the motherboard and can cause some issues. So it's generally advised just to use a fairly low-power USB charge. But you can charge it with a USB cable, which, as you know, is great because I modded a Game Boy Advance SP only in my last week's video to try and get a more convenient way of charging it. So this has a very convenient way of charging it. There's also these two clips where you could attach the adapter, so you could use this to connect to your Nintendo GameCube. In the place of that, we've got the shoulder buttons, not only L and R, but we've got L1, L2, R1, R2. So it is more versatile when it comes to emulating games from different systems. It's not just a Game Boy Advance emulator, it emulates all sorts of consoles, which we'll get to in a little bit. Construction of the hinge is very, very similar. On this side, where you previously had the power switch, which was a slide switch clicking on and off on the Game Boy Advance SP. This time we have a power button and a reset button on the side. So the positioning matches, and also the power LEDs and charging LEDs are in the same spot here. Where the cartridge slot would have gone on the Game Boy Advance SP, we've got two SD card slots. Tend to be one for the operating system and one for the games. Now, in terms of the games, I ordered this. I know that the SD cards that come with these things tend to be pretty poor, and the game selection tends to be a bit random, but a lot of people who buy these things, or might be tempted to buy these things, or who might be watching this video thinking, is this for me, don't necessarily want to spend hours kind of getting all their ROM collections organized and updating the firmware or using custom firmware. That's something I'm going to visit in another video. My main focus on this video is, if you just bought one, what's it like? And so I bought this with the SD card loaded up with games all ready to go, just so I could get it, switch it on and try the thing out. So that's what we've got here. So in there is a 128 gigabyte card full of games, and I think it's a 64 gigabyte card that's got the operating system loaded on it. What we've also got is a headphone jack, which, as you may well know, was not included on the original console. So that is definitely a nice addition. And on this side, we've got volume, which, unlike the original slider, which I like, is a push button setup, but it's fine. It's good for what it is. And you can have a look at where you'd put your... You'll notice that the battery bay is the other way up, but again, screwdriver to open it up. There's so much that is similar. Now, I own a lot of Game Boy Advance SPs at this point, but this was my first one. This was the one that I bought at launch. I've looked after. I mean, carry cases are really, really good for keeping things in good shape, aren't they? But so the throwback for me in this case was not the kind of Game Boy aesthetic like this, but it was much more trying to get it to throw back to that. So although you can get it in all sorts of different cool colors and clear plastics and things, I went with the silver because that for me is the throwback. Now, if we take a look at the actual control panel, again, very, very similar. You can tell it is an homage if you're being polite, or a complete rip-off if you're not, of the Game Boy Advance SP. The buttons are less shallow. They stick up a bit more, and they're pretty good for it, to be honest. You've got the same sort of speaker opening, mono speaker on there. Instead of just A and B, we've got A, B, X, Y. You've got a menu button where you previously had the light button, and the D-pad is a little bit bigger, a bit more substantial, and it's really nice to play on. And although when I first saw the pictures, I thought it looked huge, quite chunky, it's not actually a massive difference in size given the size of the screen real estate that you end up getting as a result. It is definitely a little bit thicker, but the screen of the original is thicker. The body of this new one is thicker. So when you're playing it, to be honest, like I mentioned earlier, the Game Boy Advance SP on long gameplay sessions could end up a little crampy, particularly with the shoulder buttons like that. So I've been finding that using this, it's actually, I mean, my hands aren't that big, but it's actually really quite comfortable to use and to hold and so on. The thing that seems to be a point of concern is the buttons have tactile switches. I love tactile switches. I love that kind of tactile clicky feedback. I've done mods on other consoles to remove the old buttons and replace them with clicky tactile switches. But there's clicky tactile switches, and then there's these, which, if I put it just next to my mic there, they are very clicky. They actually, the point of actuation requires quite a bit of pressure. So it's fine, and I've been playing on it a lot, and it's no problem at all. But definitely think maybe that's something I might want to look at modding. I believe you can put tape over the actual buttons themselves to quieten them down a little bit. That might be something I'll probably investigate. But again, out of the box, switch it on, it works, and it's quite comfortable. Speaking of the box, there's not much in there. It's a cardboard box, standard kind of Anbernic style. You lift off the white lid. There's the console inside. It comes with, there's like a screen protector that I have not put on. I mean, it's a clamshell, so I think it'll be pretty safe. And you get like the wipe and dry, the usual thing, so you can wipe down the screen, put the screen protector on, and wipe it down. Whether I end up putting that on, I don't know. And there's also a little box containing a USB-A to USB-C cable for your charging, and that's pretty much it. I think there's an instruction manual as well that I appear to have misplaced, but there's plenty of instructions online. And really, in this case, what you do is you switch on. So you press and hold the power button for a bit, and then wait, and it will boot up. So this is just on the stock OS, the standard operating system that comes built into it. I have read since that there are various custom ones. There's Mustard OS, known as MUOS now, which I think I'll probably have a go at installing and trying out. There's also a sort of tweaked version of the standard firmware, which is supposed to run a little bit better. So I'll investigate that at another time. I think what I want to look at here is, like I say, if you were to buy it, what you actually get. So it doesn't take too long to boot up. Speaking of buying it, I ended up waiting a bit, and although it cost me a little bit more than it would have done buying it directly from Anbernic and getting it sent to the UK, I wasn't sure about like if I'd get stung for import duty or anything like that. So when they arrived on Amazon, this particular bundle, 64GB for the operating system, 128GB card with games, was £99.99, and on Amazon it had like a discount link. I think I got like 10% off, so it was about £90, which for the quality of it, like the build quality of it, is really good actually. I think that's fair. I think it's a great price. When you think that my original Nintendo Game Boy that I bought in 1990 was, I think, $79.99 or $69.99. It was like 70, 80 quid. Like, there's been a lot of inflation since. This is a good price for what you're getting. And as I say, the quality of it, the build and everything else is pretty good. If you leave it unattended for a little while, it goes into sleep mode. You just press the power button briefly and it springs back to life. If you're not bothered about getting the SD card on it, it's on Amazon for $89.99. So you just pay the extra £10 for the games, which I thought was reasonable for a 128 gig SD card full of games. I've not had anything fail. I've not had it crash on me or anything like that. I know that the additional SD cards are notorious for being poor quality, but it's not been too bad, and load times and everything else are okay. I have been advised, I can't remember whose video it was I watched, I apologise. If you pointed this out, I really appreciate it. But I've been advised not to bother with game rooms and to just hop straight across to RA game, which is RetroArch. There's other stuff like you can create your favourites, there's history of which games you've played, and you can search for particular games, which is good if you've got the SD card that you've bought with it, because the order of the games is a bit random, to say the least. So if you're trying to find a particular game, search is good, and then there's various other little bits. So we'll just have a little look at the games. So you can choose between your two different storage cards. So we'll go with storage card 2, which is the one with all the games on. And then you're greeted with this interface here, which has PSP, OpenBOR, DC for Dreamcast, PlayStation, CPS 1, 2, and 3, Neo Geo, Final Burn Neo, Homebrew, MAME, V Arcade, Pico, Poke. So Pico's Pico 8, which I love, but you need the square screen really to get the best out of that, and I've got that with my Powkiddy consoles. Pokemon Mini, Atari 2600, Virtual Boy, Game & Watch, Game Boy Advance, Famicom, Super Famicom, which is the same as Super Nintendo and NES, Mega Drive, Mega CD, Master System, Game Gear, Game Boy Color, Game Boy, PC Engine, Neo Geo Pocket Color, which I've been enjoying quite a bit on this, WonderSwan, MSX, Nintendo DS, which works pretty well actually, and Nintendo 64 there, plus Atomic Wave, Naomi arcade platforms, and some ports. So there's quite a lot in there. Some of these there are loads of games. Some of them there are not so much, and it's all relative. Like Dreamcast, this console isn't likely to run that much Dreamcast that well. There's no analog stick or anything like that, but there is a nice little selection on there. And I've tried Ikaruga on there, and it ran fairly well. That's my favourite Dreamcast game, so I was quite glad to see that on there. But there's some other stuff that I want to try out, so I'll probably be adding a few more games onto that and seeing how they go. PlayStation, there's quite a lot of PlayStation games built in on there. You can tell because I've just pressed the A button and it's taken a little while to load that list. No, it wasn't. I just hadn't pressed it hard enough. Like I say, the actuation on these switches requires a bit of pressure there. But there are loads of games. We go through A, B, C, D, F, G, and then there's kind of more after it a lot of the time and various games there. Generally, I've been able to load these up and they've worked pretty well. There's a lot of games that I quite like on here. There might be some that you're not as keen on, but they work pretty well. Let's have a quick go on Tekken 3 just to see what it's like when you load something up. So you just launch the game. You can open up the menu and change the settings for that platform before you load it. You can also set up all sorts of things for your remaps of your buttons and your borders and your sizes and everything else. But for the most part, I've pretty much left things as they are. Sometimes I've maxed things out to be like a full screen to get a bit more real estate on it, but generally they're all right. Volume is down low because one of the Atomic Wave games I was playing yesterday was like crazy loud. You could still hear it when you had on 0%. So the consistency of volumes varies a bit. But Tekken 3, there we go. We'll just go on arcade mode and see how that goes. So we'll go with a bit of Eddie Gordo. It's been a while since I've played this. But it's mainly just to see how it runs because it's running PlayStation games. If there's a lot on there, it's very similar to the original PlayStation setup, obviously without the analog sticks. So everything seems to be running fairly smoothly. I can't really remember any of the controls. I think there was a lot of 2 buttons at once and all that kind of thing, but I'll have to get a little practice in. I used to be pretty good at this. I won a Tekken 3 tournament once. You wouldn't think it to see me playing now, but yeah, there we go. And then when you want to exit the game, you just press the menu button, go to close content. You can manage things like save states. You can change your core options to change how the emulator runs. You can tweak your controls. There's loads of stuff that you can do. And this is just on the quick menu that you'll see up here. If you want to press B, you can go out and there's all sorts of different settings and things for your emulators. What I've generally found a lot of the time is I've gone and tinkered with these and just made things worse. But you can kind of reset to how it was before if you're not happy with how it's going. So that's fine. But usually I'll just go on quick menu, close content, and then it takes you back to the list of games and you can come back out there and you can look at the other consoles. In terms of what I've been playing, it's a Game Boy Advance knockoff really, isn't it? So I was leaning into Game Boy Advance, but I have had a play on PlayStation, Dreamcast quite a bit. I've played all sorts of different arcade games. It's pretty great fun on the scrolling shooters and so on. Everything seems to be running pretty well, even when it gets kind of hectic on screen. As I say, I haven't gone with Pico 8 on this so much yet. I have tried it, it works, but it's not the same as having the square screen on the other square screen consoles. I think that's really where Pico 8 comes into its own. Played quite a lot of Super Nintendo, played some Super Metroid on there, that was going really well. Mega Drive was running really nicely as well, as you might expect. But Game Boy Advance is quite nice, because this screen is much taller than the original screen, because the original screen's got like this bezel at the bottom. But when you load a Game Boy Advance game, and this is definitely one of those where the game list is in a weird order, because you've got lots that are numbered first, and then it starts to go into like alphabetical order and so on. So if you get beyond these numbers, I think maybe this was one of the ones where it was in, maybe I'm imagining things. You're hearing that click though as I'm making my way through. So there are loads of games, loads and loads of games on this particular platform. Total of 947 Game Boy Advance games. So that's where the search feature comes in, quite handy. But if we just pick something at random, okay, so let's see, what have we got on the next page here? I'm not going to play Polly Pocket. I'm not going to play Postman Pat. Let's go with a bit of Power Rangers. There's loads of Power Rangers games on there. One of the things about the, like, when you buy these with the SD cards and they come preloaded with games, so like, it's like piracy ahoy, really, isn't it? But they don't tend to include specific games, like all the Mario games or the Pokemon games and things aren't on there. So I think maybe, I don't know, there's some sort of worry about that and less worried about some other games. So the thing about that is that the initial games that you might want to play, like things like Tetris, Super Mario Land, they're not on there. And in a way, that is annoying. But what I found in general is it kind of encourages you to play some of the games that you wouldn't normally play. So you can see it as a good thing. I mean, there's thousands of games on this thing. I will never get around to playing every single game on here. One of the main things I wanted to show you about Game Boy Advance SP is really smart. Like, this is all screen. It has got a bit of a bezel around it, but this is all screen. But you see how it's got the Game Boy Advance SP logo overlaid on the display, so it looks like the original Game Boy Advance SP display. I really like that. It shows you on the top what your frames per second, your frame rate is, so it should be around 60. I've to admit, I've not figured out how to sort of switch that off so it's not displayed all the time. So I can just make it look like I've put it on there on purpose so you can see how well the games are running. But Game Boy Advance does look great on here. Looks really, really good. And the size of the screen is huge. The interface, although it's not quite the same as holding the original SP, like, if you haven't seen or handled the Game Boy Advance SP in the last year, even, this isn't going to feel too far removed, and you'll feel right at home playing the games on it. If we come back out of here, again, close the content, you'll see roughly how long it takes to come back out of the games, how long it takes to load them. There is a little bit of waiting involved. Perhaps if I bought a better quality SD card and copied all of my games across to that, I might get a better performance. Also, if I went with a custom firmware, I'll probably get a better performance. But again, I'll do that in a different video. That's not what this video is. This video is, if you like the idea of this thing, you think, I might get that, what are you going to actually get? And this is the bundle that if you buy from Amazon, this will turn up and you basically switch it on and away you go. You don't have to do anything. There's no setup required. There's loads of games to play. I think anyone who's not ever entertaining the idea of modifying or tweaking or updating or anything like that, just buys it and use it stock. I think a lot of people would be really happy with this. And it's nice to have some of these things that don't require a lot of work. I genuinely think, like, if you got something like this here, the Pow Kiddie RGB20SX, I can never remember the names of these things, but if you got one of these, to get the best out of it, I've done quite a lot of significant tweaks on it, not only in terms of setting up the software so it runs just right, but also, like, I designed and replaced some of the buttons on it, and I modified the D-pad so it responded better. I've not had to do any of that with this. I probably will start messing about with it because that's what I do, but I like it. I like it a lot. And it can play all sorts of different things. Let's just go on to some Game Boy. And there are loads. 729 Game Boy games to choose from. And if I just go on, see, I'm just looking now, and there's like some of the games that I go for that are the standard Nintendo titles, like Alleyway isn't on there, but Amazing Spider-Man is, which is a licensed game. You'd think that might be more of an issue. So who knows what the logic is on these things? If you know, I'm curious. Let me know in the comments. I'm probably going to add some more stuff to it. I'd like to get LSDJ on here and see how it is, because that would be great if I could do that and make the music, because it's got the headphones out and everything else. So if it runs LSDJ, well, like, that will pay for this console in itself. But there are loads of different games here. Let's find something that I fancy playing. There's loads I fancy playing, and I'm not even going to be playing it for long, so it doesn't actually matter. But that's kind of what I spend a lot of my time doing with these things, either curating the collections and getting the games just right, or like the old Blockbuster Video or Netflix conundrum of you spend more time choosing something to watch than you do of actually watching it. Similar kind of thing here. I love looking through, and as you are looking through, you get like the little thumbnails, you get the logo, you get what the game box looked like, and you get like a little screenshot. So even if you've never played a game before, you get a feel for what it's like. So Bubble Ghost, oh, that looks pretty interesting. Not played that one before, and then you can load that one up. Or Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle 2 or Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle, pretty much the same game. Loads and loads of different stuff on here. Bust a Move 2, yeah, on the Game Boy. Puzzle Bobble on the Game Boy. Look at that border though, it's kind of nice. Like they've moved the dot matrix with stereo sound around to the side, but that looks pretty authentic, doesn't it? And down to the pixel overlay and everything else, it looks very much like the original Game Boy. I haven't actually got batteries in the game in this at the moment to make a comparison, but you can see like how the overlay emulates the original actual lens. I like it. I think it's cool. If that bothers you though, like if you feel like some of this space is being wasted and you want to make it bigger, you can go into the menu and come back out there, and let's say we go to settings. I very often get lost in these settings. I'm really not very good at it, so I think a lot of people who buy one of these things might again get lost in all these RetroArch settings, but there is a lot that you can do on there. So if I go to say the user interface, I think it is, and you've got the on-screen overlay with the bezels, you can change that display, you can turn that off, and then if we come back out of there, we've now just got the blank screen around it. And if you want that display to be scaled up a bit, again, you get that option. You can go into the video output, and you can go on scaling and integer scale on, and change the let's see, again, there's a lot of this that I'm not very good at. Aspect ratio, custom, you can go to full, which is just like the full screen. And then if I come back out of there again, it's enlarged on the screen. It's a bit bigger. So your display is much bigger, but it doesn't look kind of as authentic as it did when it was the main display. But it's to your choice, and it's going to be your console if you port it. So it's nice to know you can tweak it for whatever works well for you. So we've got Bust a Move on that, which I always thought like is hilarious because it's based on matching colors, and if you've got that on the Nintendo Game Boy with its monochrome screen, it is kind of hard to see what you're doing. It's not too bad; it does kind of work, but it's just funny that it even exists on the Game Boy because it's very much a color-based game. Now, if I come out of here and go to now, I'll have to go back to the main menu, quick menu, and close content. The one issue I've had so far is when I went on the Neo Geo emulation. So everything has worked really well for me so far. Puzzle Bobble, which is Bust a Move under a different name, works really well. But if I just go back to Neo Geo, which is here, and load that one up. It's mainly like fighting games and things like that on there, but I used to have a Neo Geo arcade cabinet, loved it, had a load of cartridges, sold them for far too little and wish I hadn't. Last Resort is one of them, and one of my favourite games on that system was a shoot 'em up called, let's just find it on here. Yeah, I loved it so much I can't remember the name of it. I forget a lot of things. I wouldn't read too much into that. So Polestar is a scrolling shooter game. It was one of my favourite games on the Neo Geo MVS system. So I was really excited to see that on there. But when I go to launch this one, it says loading and then exiting and then goes back to the menu screen, which is kind of disappointing when it was one of the main ones that I wanted to look at. But everything else seems to work fine. And if we have a little look on like Puzzle Bobble 2, which is Bust a Move 2, you'll see there is a significant difference in terms of when you've got the color on the screen. And then you just can load that up there. When it's an arcade game, you press select to put some credits in and then start playing. And yeah, you'll see that this is, oh, you got to launch with the B button there. So your button mappings you can change around. You can see we're doing the same game now, but full color on this thing. I mean, this is what really highlights how far we've come compared to playing the original Game Boy, which was this sort of form factor handheld. To be able to play games like this, whoops, badly, on a handheld is just amazing. And to buy it and it's just rammed full of these games, I think it's great. So yeah, I just wanted to give my initial impressions of it, very much in a kind of just what's it like if you buy it and use it stock, and I like it. I thought it was going to feel too chunky. It's actually really quite comfortable to hold. I think my fingers line up with the shoulder buttons quite nicely. I haven't got as far as trying out the HD output, and I'm guessing a lot of people who buy this thing won't use the HD output. When I close the lid, it goes into sleep mode. So if I want to, it does still use up a bit of power for that, so I wouldn't leave it in sleep mode for days or whatever else. But if I'm just going to go and grab something to eat, or if I need to answer the door or something like that, and then I can come back to it, I just open it up and immediately it's straight back in. And it's because it's got those magnets in the lid, but also the magnets kind of, the hinge feels really nice and solid. It's quite a satisfying close. I've seen people snapping it shut. It's not really my style. I'd rather be quite careful and gentle, but that last little pull from the magnets is really satisfying. And I think it's got enough of the aesthetic and the feel for it to be a nice throwback to the Game Boy Advance SP, but it's different enough to feel new and exciting and different and fun. So I was on the fence about buying one. I was weak, so I got one. I don't regret it. Yes, I've got quite a few other ones of these things. Yes, I buy them myself, so I'm not necessarily just getting them for free or reviewing or anything like that. But I think it offers enough that's a little different, particularly compared to this one that I've been playing quite a lot and probably will continue to play a lot. Like, they're just very different beasts, and it's nice that within this very crowded market, really, we've got something for everyone. So if you want to get one of these, you can get them straight from the Anbernic website. If you want to go via Amazon, I'll leave links in the description for all of these things if you fancy getting one yourself. I will be looking into doing some slight mods on it. It doesn't need much, but I'm going to look at what I can do with these buttons to maybe quieten them down a little bit, make them feel a little more comfortable to the touch, maybe get rid of that rattle on there. But these are things I don't really need to do. I just do these things because I can. So if I do, I will show you. There is a very, very slight scratch starting to appear on the hinge here from where it closes and opens. So I might have a little bit of an investigate of what is in there that's maybe causing that. But the build quality is great. That hinge is good. If you kind of grab it and twist slightly, it feels really, really solid. Like, it feels like a really high quality piece of kit, which is good when you're parting with your hard-earned cash for it. So yeah, my initial impressions are good. I'm quite fond of it, and if I start modding it, or if I install some other firmware, I will show you. So I mentioned earlier, I love the Game Boy Advance SP, and recently I installed a USB-C power charging port on there. If you're curious about that, if you've still got a Game Boy Advance SP and you want to maybe explore modding that, then you might want to check out the video. I'll leave a link up here. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.